now I'm in a spot where my nuts are 3 inches away from my fucking blade, and I'm like, I gotta make this happen. I've worked way too hard.
You're facing Said Nurmagomedov, UFC 270, man. It's a big pay-per-view. That's a positive. You know what I mean? I expected you to be back much sooner. He's a solid opponent, man. He's 3-1 in the UFC. What is your breakdown of him and his style?
Dagestani, so I know he's going to be able to wrestle. But he fights more like Zabit. I think he's one of Zabit's training partners too. I mean, they have that really good, like clean polish, like kickboxing style. He spins a lot. I think, that's probably his most dangerous weapon is spinning back fist, spinning hook kick, spinning back kick. But that's kind of something that I saw a lot, coming up with Darren Cruikshank. Like, if I could count the number of times I've been smoked in the liver with a spinning back kick by a dude that's 40 pounds heavier than me, I'd lose count because I've seen that, pretty much my whole career. That's kind of the style of guys that I came up fighting against. So, when the matchup was announced, I knew that, there was a lot of things I needed to be really, really sharp with because, Said is a guy that can shut your lights off in a big hurry. But I was confident, you know what I mean, just because I'd seen it so much prior to, even signing this fight.
When you signed this fight, a lot of people look at the circumstances of the world, man, because fights are being canceled because of visa issues. And, he's a guy that trains outside of the U.S. Was there any hesitation for you?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there was any hesitation, but I'm also, open to the fact that maybe shit doesn't work out and I end up fighting somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, the longer you're in the sport, the more you kind of focus inward. You start to focus on yourself more and you worry less and less about your opponents. It's just like, I've fought everybody at bantamweight. I fought the toughest guys in the world. I fought the champ, so the champ. You know what I mean? So it's like, I know that every fight is going to be a tough fight. Like, no matter what, like there's not an easy fight at bantamweight. Not when you're ranked. So it's more about just getting yourself as sharp as you possibly can. So it's like, all right, so if Said can't, get in the country for whatever reason, like the UFC's got 90 other dudes to pull from, I might be fighting someone that I've never heard of or that I vaguely know of, or that's a completely different matchup. You know what I mean? But as long as I'm physically and mentally prepared, like I know I can get in there and get my shit done.
Well, the experience factor, man. You've said it right there. You've faced the best of the best in the division throughout the years, so it's nothing's gonna be really a surprise, man. Especially you trained with Derek Cruikshank for so many years. You know what I mean? I think that's like a very unique
That dude
style.
he is a surprise, dude. He's nuts. I mean, still to this day, he's the best kickboxer I've ever trained with. He really is. Like, Darren's one of those guys that, like, if the stars would align for him, and if he, didn't necessarily fall out of love with the sport when he did, he did it his whole life. I think when he got in the UFC, it was kind of like he was kind of getting burnt out, like he was almost tired of fighting. It's like, but if he peaked at a different time, I really believe that, he was the most talented and the best guy in the world. That he just fell out of love with MMA, because I've still to this day never seen anybody that can do the shit that dude can do in the cage.
Yeah, and especially when you went over to Japan and I got to see him like fight there and the rule set that almost is made perfect for Darren.
Yeah, I mean, I think his first fight there, I was with him, and like I just remember, I didn't say anything. I just like watched, like, oh my god, like he just murdered this poor guy.
Yeah.
I honestly felt bad for him. I was like, oh, this poor bastard's just getting kicked in the face on the ground. I mean, it was just like a street fight, like where one guy has no weapons, the other guy's just you know what I mean? The other dude's got a shotgun and he's chasing the dude around. It was nasty. He's a bad dude.
Yeah. And you mentioned that soccer kicks, man. I know that a lot of people, it's a brutal, a move right there. If you hit that.
Dude, Honestly, I think that the UFC should adopt those rules. I really do. Reason being, you know, people want to see stand-up fights, right? People want to see guys like, let's be honest, you know what I mean? The casual MMA fan, which makes up the majority of the MMA fan base, they want to see two guys go out there and slug it out. And if you add like soccer kicks, knees to the ground, like people are going to be a lot less uh, like willing to go to the ground. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to want to hang out on the ground if you know you can get booted in the face. Dudes are going to be scrambling on their feet a lot more. I think it would make for like a more exciting aspect of the sport. I mean, and MMA has to evolve. You know what I mean? And in a lot of ways, the scoring system needs to evolve. You know, the judging needs to evolve. Like the sport grew so fast, and all the regulations and rules didn't. You know, and now we're kind of in this weird spot where judges don't have the slightest fucking clue what's going on, and the scoring system is a boxing scoring system. It doesn't necessarily favor, you know, MMA fighters or grapplers. Like, it's crazy to me that you know this is like one of the biggest sports in the world, and that like all these things that you know regulate this sport are so unevolved and so you know 2000s. You know that something should have changed. Do you think?
You would think, and if it did change, we would never have the situation with the bantamweight title, huh?
No, I mean, uh, I like Eljo, you know, and you know I'm happy for him. Um, but at the same time, you know, that's a weird one. That's a weird one. That's hard to, you know, it's a hard pill to swallow because I think if you know the sport, you're like, you know, Peter Yan is the best guy in the world, but technically, Aljamain Sterling is the champ, you know. So, you know, who knows? Maybe he can put something together and get Peter out of there, you know, because Eljo is a super good grappler, but I don't see it happening. I mean, Peter Yan is the guy to beat right now at bantamweight.
Your last fight against Marab, I thought it was a very entertaining fight. You guys had a lot of good exchanges. Looking back at
Yeah.
it, what do you think just didn't click for you to get that win?
No, I think the main thing was the um, the time. So I was supposed to fight him in March, and then I got you know 3 different opponents. Fight ends up getting canceled, and then I re-signed it for May. And by the time I fought Marab, like had I fought him in March, I think it would have been a lot different. But by the time I fought him, I was just worn out, man. I was worn out. My body was beat up. I was nursing a bunch of injuries, but I'd already put so much work into it. It was like I wasn't in a position where I could, you know, I could turn it down. Like I had to fight, and it just, you know, it was a great night for him, and it just was the worst night for me. You know, if there's one that I really want to get back, it's that one. Just because, I mean, that loss hurt me worse than probably any loss has ever hurt me. Just because, like when it was over, I was just like, what the fuck was I doing in there? You know what I mean? I just didn't show up. Like I had all these tools and all these, you know, the game plan to beat him. You know, I rocked him in the first round with a jab, and I just stood there. It's like I heard him, and I just like stood there and waited and hesitated. And it's like, you know, watching it back, I was just pulling my hair out. Like, what are you doing, man? And you know, I thought the fight, you know, after I watched it with the commentary on, and I was like, man, that's, you know, they're dogging me pretty bad. And then I turned the commentary off and I watched it, and I was like, I don't really see how I didn't win 2 rounds of that fight. You know, I thought the first round was back and forth, but you know, normally when you have a back and forth fight, the dude that's going forward is the one that's, you know, winning. And you know, there's just a few technical errors I made. You know, like shoulder rolling a bunch of shots, and like that doesn't look good because you know, a dude throws a punch at you and you go like this and you move back, and like to the untrained eye, it just looks like you're getting smoked. But really, like I knew I was getting hit in the shoulder, but like, did everyone else know that? I mean, not really. I mean, not judging by the crowd's response. So you know, there's just a few things I need to clean up so that you know it didn't look the way it looked. But you know, I think I beat Marab, but the judges don't, and the reality is that I didn't. So here we are. And now, I mean, now I'm in a spot where my nuts are 3 inches away from my fucking blade, and I'm like, I gotta make this happen. You know, I've worked way too hard. You know, and to be in a position like this. I never would have, imagined this for myself. I really still see myself as someone that, should be competing, in the top, easily in the top 10, maybe in the top 5. I think there's a few things I need to clean up, and I think I'm close to one of the best in the world on any given night. So, no, I really need to make a statement against Said. Like, this has to be the best performance of my career. You know what I mean? And that kind of pressure brings out, I think, the best in me. Or at least it has in the past. So, I gotta show up, man. I'll put the fucking work in. I've been working so hard for so long. It's like, at this point, it's just like, I just need to stay injury free, not get COVID, and show up to whoop this dude's ass on the 20th, 22nd on this fucking fight.
It's never too late, man, because we see 2 champions right now. The flyweight champion, he was cut, he came back, he's the champ now. Yeah. Oliveira, he was on the edge of getting cut a few times, with these performances that he had, and now he's the champ, man. Like, I hate when people count fighters out.
Yeah, well, that's what fighting is, essentially, right? It's just battling adversity, right? It's like, and MMA is not like boxing. Boxing is like one of those sports where it's like you want to be polished, you want to be this. I mean, and MMA is like, the best guys in the world, the most well-known, biggest characters, like those guys fought so much adversity. Like Jorge Masvidal, that guy took so much. Like Michael Chandler lost 4 fights in a row in Bellator, and now then fought for the UFC title. It's like how much, it's like that stupid Rocky saying, like how much can you take, how many times can you get hit and get back up? And then like I come from like a pretty hard-nosed, like blue collar background, and like getting knocked down is nothing that I haven't, had in my life. I've battled it all. So it's like, it doesn't discourage me. You know what I mean? Like seeing people kind of lose, because when you're winning, like everyone's like giving you the good job and the pat on the back. But when you're losing, it's like, it gets lonely, man. It gets lonely and it gets dark and it gets weird. And like you see people that, like really, you thought really, really, were there for you no matter what, just kind of fucking fade away and all that stuff happens. And like, you need to like be mentally strong, like through that. And that's the hardest thing about losing, for me is like, it opens your eyes up to like the reality of what the sport is. It's like, as an athlete, like you're as good as your last fight and that's it, so, January 23rd, when this is said and done, you know what I mean? I want people to remember, how good I am and how much potential I have going forward. And, I think I'm physically and mentally ready to, make a statement and put myself back on the map. I have to.
Sometimes for certain fighters, that's what they needed to go through, to get rid of all that excess baggage, so to say, that stuff that they didn't need necessarily while they were winning, and then get back on that winning track without the distractions. Yeah.
I mean, because my UFC career started off pretty hot, you know what I mean? I was in the top 10. I was number 7 in the world in 6 months. I fought once. I fought 2 months later, and then I fought Brian Caraway, and I went from being some dork in the Midwest to, being the number 7 guy in the world. And I was moving way faster than I should have, you know what I mean? I wish someone would have been in my corner and would have been like, dude, slow the fuck down, you know what I mean? We'll take the Sean O'Malley route and we'll take a few steps back and we'll fight some guys that are, 40 years old and on their way out. But, like me being the stubborn prick that I am and just believing in myself the way I always have, I was like, fuck it, I can beat these guys, let's do it. And the reality was that like they had so much more UFC experience than I did. They had so many more, fights under those lights. And, I was still making rookie mistakes, and now I feel like I'm a veteran, you know what I mean? I've officially I've done it all. You know what I mean? I really, I fought tough guys. I've won, I've lost. I felt all the pains that this sport can bring to you. And it's like, nothing really scares me anymore. You know what I mean? And like, that's kind of the place you need to be at as a fighter. Like, you just be like, yeah, fuck it, let's do it. You know what I mean? I don't care who it is, let's just fight.
A couple other questions outside of the fight. What do you think MMA fans obsess about too much that fighters don't really care about?
Man, what are MMA fighters? I think people like MMA fans. Obviously, you know what I mean. Like they fall in love with like these personalities and these people in the cage, but it's like, uh, when you play any other sport, like when you wrestle, you can be like the flashiest wrestler in the world. You can be all these different things, but like if you're not winning the big tournaments, no one gives a shit about you. But in MMA, like you can be Sean O'Malley. You can be that dude that like isn't fighting anyone that's, you know what I mean, at the top, and people really believe that you are just like a god. And it's like, well, it's one thing to look really good against somebody that you're a 10-1 favorite against. It's another thing to be a 3-1 underdog and go out there and win. You know what I mean? Like that's where real fighters are made. And like the MMA fans in general, like they just see the performance, not necessarily, they don't really see, who it's against or, who that person's fought. I think that's part of that's the entertainment side of MMA, but it's just like, it's not always the two best guys that are going to get, the most clout. And, that's one of the problems with MMA is that, you might be the best guy in the world. You might be deserving of the shot, and you might never get it because homeboy is an asshole on social media and he's got more clout than you. You know what I mean? So you might be the best guy, but you might never get the shot to prove it.
PTSD in combat sports, from injuries, it could be from bad weight cuts or losses or even just damage taken in training or even in fights. Have you experienced this in the past or seen it in other fighters around you?
Yeah. I didn't really know, like I started working with a sports psychologist and I had no idea what PTSD really was. And, and then we started talking about like, do you remember your fights? And I'm like, well, if you've ever watched my fights or heard me in the corner, like when the round's over, the first thing I ask my corner is like, did I win that round? Because like everything is happening so fast. I have no idea what it looks like. And I'm one brutally tough bastard. So like you might hit me with a fucking head kick and I'm like still there, trying to fight. And they're like, no, you didn't. And I'm like, oh shit. Okay. Okay. And like that's essentially PTSD is because you're like your adrenaline's so high, you're essentially not remembering what's happening. You know what I mean? Because you're in such a high stress situation. And I never really understood that. And looking back, I'm like, man, there's been times when I'd go out there and I'd start someone in the first round, and afterwards I'd just be pissed off. You know what I mean? Like I'd be at my after party and I'd still be like looking at everybody, like people would bump into me and I'd be like, oh, like weird. And it's because I was still in that like fight mode and I couldn't necessarily shut it off. And and that's an MMA fight in a controlled environment. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like for like a war veteran that is in that real. I mean, like let's face it. Like I have a pretty good chance of fucking walking out of the cage when I walk into it. Like, but when you walk into war, you walk into a real fight. Like it's a little different. So like those guys. I mean, like I get it a little bit, and I've experienced it, but I can't imagine what it's like for them. You know what I mean? Like a few days and I'm cool, and I'm back to normal. But for those guys, man, it could be, they might never, they may never come back. So that's, and I understand it. You know what I mean? So, and it's hard to, like you hear PTSD, you just think, oh yeah, that's sad. But when you've actually experienced it, you're like, yeah, it's something else. You have to almost experience it to understand it, though.
And you mentioned judging earlier about the problems with judging, and some people are throwing out there open scoring. Like, let's make it open. Let's make the judges'
Yep.
scores in the arena on the scoreboard. Do you feel like that would be a good idea to implement in the highest level in the UFC?
Um, it might hold them a little more accountable. You know what I mean? Because it's one thing when you're turning in a scorecard and no one knows until it's over. It probably be better for the athletes to know. You know what I mean? I think maybe you would see, like if a dude knew that he was down. You know what I mean? Like you're down. You're down 2 rounds. You have to get a finish. It's one thing like like in the Merab fight, for instance, like I knew the first round was back and forth and it was close. The second round, I knew I lost. When I sat down on the stool, I knew I lost. And the third round, I knew I had to win, and I knew I won the third round, like when it was over. And so I was kind of in, but you know what I mean? Like, had I known that, you know, two judges had him winning, you know, the first round, I might have fought a little differently, you know. So for the athlete, it might be better. And then, you know, like, talk about a more exciting experience, you know, for fans. Like, you know, you're down 2 rounds, you know, like, you got to go out, you got to go for broke. You know what I mean? Like, you're going to see some crazy shit happen in that third round. You know what I mean? If you really know, you know what I mean? If I sat down on that stool and I knew I had to knock somebody out, I'd be fighting pretty recklessly, you know, and that might be something that's good for the fans. So, I mean, that would be good. But I think the biggest issue is that, like, the judges don't understand the sport. You know, they don't know the positioning. They don't understand, you know, and I get it. You know, MMA is a super complex sport, and unless you're doing it every day, like, how the hell would you know? You know, how would you know that when, you know, one dude's in side control and he sweeps the other guy, like, that's a big deal. You know, and it just looks like, you know, to the untrained eye, though, just like two dudes rolling around punching each other. You know, no one has a fucking clue. So I just think we need more, you know, ex-MMA fighters that really understand the sport, understand the positions, to become judges. You know, we need to get some of these boxing guys out of there because, you know, if you're looking at fighting through like that limited perspective, it's hard to judge. You know what I mean? It's like me judging a fucking horse race or something. Like, I don't know shit about horses. I just see the, you know what I mean? Like, or something like that. Like, imagine, you know, you're judging a sport and you don't really fully understand the sport. Like, someone gave you a brief overview and you've seen it before, but you've never experienced it, so you don't actually know what the hell's going on. So you're just like, I think that guy won. And you know what I mean? And this isn't like, we're talking about like people's livelihoods. Like, this is a big deal, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. You know, and if something doesn't happen with MMA, like, MMA turns into boxing. I mean, that's what killed boxing, was bad judging. You know what I mean? Like, bad judging absolutely killed boxing. It's like, you know, anybody could see that this guy won, but, you know, the other guy ends up winning, and you're just like sitting here like, no, that doesn't make any sense. And then the sport loses its credibility, and people don't want to tune in as bad anymore. So, I mean, I think something absolutely has to be done, and I think the only answer, you know, to the MMA judging issue is just to have actual people that have experience in MMA, you know, sitting in those seats, judging the fights unbiasedly. I think that's the only way that it becomes more fair.
Definitely. I agree with you completely. January 22nd, man, you're back in action, UFC 270. Cody, appreciate your time, and good luck on the rest of the camp and on the performance.
Thank you.